Cloud, share screen, PowerPoint, share, play from start, and we'll move on. Can you all see the screen? Okay. So is my dissertation trying to get me? There were times where I would have said definitely yes. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. Not convinced. I don't completely trust her, but I'm glad she exists now. This is really just the overview that was sent out to everyone. So it really is, the dissertation is a big deal. It's the one thing that many people know about a PhD program before they ever get to one. They know there's something called a dissertation at the end, but don't necessarily know what that process entails. So we're going to talk about what that process entails, what it looks like for us, what we want you to know about our own experiences of the dissertation, and taking any questions that you might have. But it's a big deal. It's an artifact. It's something that you walk away having forever. Although I will admit, it took me, I defended my dissertation now, in all honesty, almost 20 years ago. It was 19 years ago. And it took me 16 years to buy a copy of it because I just didn't want to see the hardbound copy of it. Bought one from my chair. She was into that. That's fine. But I also have to remember, I went straight through high school. And then I had that summer, I went to undergrad. Then I had that summer, my master's program. Then I had 1 week to my doctoral program. I squeezed all this stuff in really quickly. So that dissertation was the only part that was really challenging. I had doctoral comps. They were a little challenging, but the dissertation was the hardest piece. I didn't want to see that thing again. We were completely broken up for a while. Then, we talked it out and decided to reconcile, but it took a long time for me to even want to see it. So I did ultimately buy a copy of it. I don't know if your experience was similar to that, Dr. Dixon.
Very much. I still haven't. And I have several friends that haven't. I got, it's funny. I have a previous thesis from many years ago, like you, and I got that one really quick. I was all excited. Like everybody I knew got a copy. I have like way too many copies. I probably have 2 now. My dissertation, nope, nope, still. And I never produced a document off of it, which is not surprisingly unusual by lots of people I know. Because I just never wanted to touch it again.
You can squeeze 3. People say you can squeeze 3 articles out of a dissertation. I got one.
I got one presentation and one like newsletter-ish kind of thing. That's all I wanted to do. And that was from memory. Yeah.
It was interesting because I'll talk about my actual dissertation a little bit later. I squeezed a couple presentations out of it, one publication, only because somebody shamed me into doing it. Because I was
yes, they do, Jane.
We have a question?
Jane asked, they actually make it into a book. Yes. Yeah. They're kind of bland looking books.
I wish I were in
I'm
Toronto.
trying to think where my sitting. Oh man. Yeah. Kind of boring. Most of the ones I've always said,
Oh, he's in it.
Dark navy. Mine is black with gold. It's a very kind of encyclopedia looking book. Got your title and your name on the end of it and all that stuff. Now, I don't know about yours, but all of them I've ever seen are also only 1 page. So my document was, oh gosh, thesis was probably 200 and something pages, but they only print on one side. So it looks thicker and bigger than it really is.
Mine's just like a little book. I'm not in Toronto, so.
I know, I was trying to think of where mine was. See how important it is to me now?
But
back
there's someone on, thank goodness, who logged in who is in Toronto. So if they want to go get my dissertation, that's fine. If not, I can maybe just show it later. But it's just like a bound little black book.
Leather bound black book, yeah. Or blue or red. I've seen dark blue, red at my previous university for some years and black some years.
Yeah, mine was black and I really didn't get it until probably 2016. It would be in my office on the bookshelf.
I have a question.
Sure.
So I know there's different PhD programs and PsyD programs and whatnot. So are all of them the same length, or do all of them differ in size, length?
Generally, as far as that question, they're going to be the same. Me and Dr. TRW went to completely different schools, and there might be formatting differences inside. For example, you have to do a definition of terms. Mine was definitely in my chapter 1. Some schools that's in chapter 2. Almost everywhere, 3, 4, and 5 look the same, but the content of 1 and 2 can be different. Here, we do some stuff a little different.
You know what I will show you? Let me stop this for a second. There's something I think is really helpful at a place that might answer that question for you. And it's not my intellectual property, but I will find a way to doctor it up a little bit. And I was sharing this with a student the other day. Let me share my screen here, and this might answer your question a little bit. So the place where I used to work has these dissertation checklists. And this is the qualitative dissertation checklist. So what they do is go through over here. All of this is the stuff that has to be in the abstract. And then for chapter 1, they have, did we get to 1 yet? Oh, this is still background stuff. And you get to each chapter and it tells you along this line exactly what needs to be there. I thought this was chapter 1. Dissertation checklist. So abstract, everything there. Oh yeah, chapter 1. All of these things must be included in chapter 1. Then chapter 2 has all the things that must be included in chapter 2. So it's a really thorough checklist for the student. So here's all of the chapter 2 stuff for qualitative dissertation, the chapter 3, 4, 5, it's all in there. I love this. It's one of the few things I can say I genuinely loved about the research process there, because students had no confusion about what it is they were supposed to be doing.
So yeah, like, so for us, and we'll show you later, but there's a template that the school uses. I tell students as soon as they start writing, just start using the template to help answer those questions. My school had a template just like Dr. TRW's had theirs, and it was like, if you had the qualitative methodologist, he gave you his template. If you had the quantitative methodologist, she gave you her template. But generally, all the contents are the same. Where some of it lands is a little different depending on the school or the approach or the year. So you could learn from, like, I know Jordan, you talked about going to different programs in different school and something, and I thought about that too. And I thought, well, you can get the gist of it from any school, and you can go to any school's doc program often. And if you can find their doctoral manual on there, it often shows you. Or certain professors have it, and I will show y'all here a little bit later what we built into Canvas for the doc students too. Matter of fact, I'll work on pulling it up while y'all talk about this real quick.
Perfect. And I also have 2 pictures I'll show you in my dissertation. So, okay, so, oh, this is about yours, so this is good. So more about the dissertation process. So you have information that you need to be aware of how the dissertation process runs here at the Chicago School. So one of the things here is there's a Form A, Form B, Form C, Form D, Form E. 5 forms, just like you have 5 chapters, even though the forms don't correspond to the chapter. So the first thing you will do is you'll pick a chair in a committee, and then you'll complete your Form A. So you need to know who you're going to work with, who's interested in this topic, who understands the topic. Just a few days ago, a student sent me a request to talk about, are you interested in my topic? Can we work together? Are these the types of things that are interesting to you? Do you have expertise in this? Do you have an interest in this? So that is how people start to develop their interest in the committee, who will comprise the committee, who's the important know-it-all in our department about that, because your chair has to come from our department.
Yeah, and matter of fact, I have all this. If you can let me share for a second,
Sure.
I will show you in Canvas. Me and the others were talking, and then so me and Colleen got together and was like, we don't really like how the school has formatted their well, not necessarily formatted, but their web page is not that user friendly as far as understanding. So we took everything on that page and we put it in the CES online advising forum. So everything we're talking about today is actually here. So right here, if you click on this, it opens up and it kind of gives you a link to all the faculty, their bios, any presentations and stuff they did, dissertation manuals, all that stuff. And I won't click through all of them. The next one is, here's a copy of the dissertation manual, read it, upload your signed copy showing you signed it. Here's the discussion on Form A, Form B, forms, because some of these forms you'll see in a minute, if we were to pull them up, some of them have several parts to them. Like Form C is getting your proposal ready, then it going through the faculty and looking at it going, okay, we approve the proposal, or you need to make some changes. Then the next form is signing off on that. So it has like 2 or 3 pieces. So you'll see 3 of them in here: scheduling a defense meeting, doing your IRB stuff. This is these are reviews of your document. That's your oral defense. And then that's approval of your oral defense. And then it goes to manuscript prep. So I will go ahead and let Dr. share again, but what she's talking about there is in more detail in there for the students. And we just built that, so we'll get it out to y'all. I'll actually cover it in one of our meetings here coming up.
All right, so back to the chapters. Is that where we were? Oh no, back to the forms. So these are the forms that you'll need. You will first have your Form A, you pick your committee, then you will kind of identify the goals of your dissertation in that second form. The third one is your proposal review form, your dissertation review, and then your oral defense form. We'll talk a little bit about what all those things really mean as we go through the slide and talk about our own experiences. There are also several really important resources that you can find that helps you with the dissertation process if you just Google TCSPP dissertation or go back to the page that we've already set up for you in the advising form,
And the one in the advising forum, each one of those little module unit parts will take you to the part you need. It'll take you to the form and give the specific instructions better than those that the university provides. Deeper, maybe not better, deeper.
More depth. And then we have the chapters of your research. It's really important to know that there are three big components to a dissertation. The first is the prospectus, the proposal, and the defense. The prospectus is like a little mini dissertation. This is my idea. I'm going to have 10, 15 pages about what I want to do. My dissertation was on eating disorders in African-American women. So I had to have a prospectus for my chair. This is what I want to look at. These are the things I kind of know. And it was a mini proposal. A proposal is actually the first 3 chapters of your dissertation, and the defense is pretty much the whole thing. The last 2 chapters, but inclusive of the first 3. So with a little more detail, the proposal, that first chapter is your introduction to the study. This is what I want the reader to be aware of before they really get into this research.
Yep.
Then chapter 2 is the literature review. This is what's already been published on things kind of close to my topic, but not exactly my topic because nothing's really been done on this topic. So for me, looking at eating disorders in Black women, I had to look at eating disorders. Then I had to look at research on Black women. Then I had to kind of say, hey, look, nobody really intersects these two in any kind of meaningful way. These are some ideas about why, based on the literature, but this is really important. This is the gap in the literature. I'm doing this research because no one has really done this particular piece of it. And then the research design and methodology, I had to say, you know what? I'm doing this because this is important. And I'm going to do it in a way that really works for this particular population. And in my case, because I'm a clinician anyway, and I think every session is some type of qualitative research, I decided to continue that qualitative research tradition and do a qualitative study and create a theory. It's called a grounded theory after basically doing these interviews and manipulating and massaging the data. So those were the first 3 chapters. Then one of my actual favorite parts of the, I actually really do like the IRB. Yeah, I love them. I sat on ours for 2 years. I sat on Walden's for like 5 or 6 years, and the University of Liverpool randomly. I sat on theirs for several years. But the Institutional Review Board is the group that makes sure you don't do something ethical and horrible to people when you're doing your research, quite honestly. So for instance, one of my thesis students, I actually wrote it down. How many theses have I chaired? I've done dissertations and thesis reviews. So for thesis, I've done 22. I chaired 22 different theses, but one of them that stuck out and we ended up not finishing it. This person wanted to, I shouldn't laugh. It was interesting. She wanted to infect people with the common cold and see how it affected another variable. We generally frown upon giving diseases to people, especially at the university. So that one didn't go through, but the IRB would have absolutely rejected any effort to do that because they are there to protect the public, the profession, the professional, multiple P's. And giving people diseases is a little counterintuitive and against, the charge of any IRB. So they are there to protect people. My dissertation got flagged for the IRB too, and it had to have not just an expedited review, which is one of the 2 types of reviews where one person can review and see if this actually meets criteria and can move forward with respect to being harmful or not to people. Mine was flagged because I was looking at eating disorders in a population, and it threw everybody off. So instead of having an expedited review, it was a full board review. So I had to actually go back to the place where I did my doctorate and sit there in a room with my chair and defend that I could do a dissertation on eating disorders, because eating disorders just sounded like death to the other people on the committee who were not clinicians. But in my defense, I had been by that point licensed, independently licensed and practicing for several years and worked in an eating disorders clinic. So between that and my chair and all kinds of other evidence that I had to provide, I was allowed to do the dissertation because it seemed like less of a risk, because I should have had the training to know when I needed to stop with a person and refer them out if they were too triggered by what was going on. So those are my first three. Dr. Dixon.
Oh, goodness. I wanted to add something on the proposal document, the first three chapters anyways, is think of it this way, I think of kind of as road construction. So really in the introduction to the study, so chapter 1, you're like Dr. Jerry said, you are writing about what you want your study to be about, how it's important, why you're writing about this. Chapter 2 is to find out what is out there, but what are the holes in the data that you need to fill using what you said in chapter 1. So then you're going to say, okay, I've done this review. Here are the holes in the data, and I want to fill this one and this one or that one. So fine, okay, how are you going to do that? You're going to use the specific research design and methodology to do that, qualitative, quantitative, whatever. And then I would say, like, from my experience and experience of others that I know of, I didn't have any trouble at all with mine, except I did have to throw out one participant because I was interviewing college women that had attended all girls schools in high school and then went on to large public universities, and which doesn't sound like it'd be too triggering, right? But slightly so. And I ended up having one of them that I had to throw out because even with all my criteria, she actually was 17 when we did the interview, but she had just she kind of did that assumed she was 18 thing because she was turning 18 that month. And then when I realized she was 17th when we did it, I had to throw it out because if I had submitted that to IRB, I wouldn't have the proper consent because I would have needed her parental consent, even though she was a college junior, because these young ladies left this girls' school anywhere with 35 to 45 hours of college experience, but they were 16 and a half, 17, 18 years old sometimes when they left. And so you'd find that, that there was a lot of emotional strain and difficulty that they had, that the students that had gone to regular non-all girls schools would experience. So, I had to throw that one out. I had to watch for that, but I still got a pretty expedited dissertation. I usually tell students, so if I'm on your committee, if I'm your chair, I'm always going to point you, I'm going to point you into a direction of, here's what you want to do. Here's the easiest way to get through IRB. Here is the tricky way to get out through IRB. And here's the don't even try it, we're going to be here for years approach. So students will come and like, oh, I want to work with, anytime you want to work with clients, definitely children, any protected population, prisons,
yes.
Anytime you want to work with a protected population or population with limited rights, you are going to have trouble.
Institutionalized people, severely mental ill.
People with mental illness, to pregnant women. God, we could go on for days. Had one of our friends, one of the TRW has met. He did his dissertation. He was going to interview sex therapists who work. Well, no, they weren't all necessarily sex therapists. Therapists who worked with people with porn addiction. It took him 4 reviews to get through, even though he wouldn't go near a client. Nowhere near a client. The word porn threw them off. And some of his definition of terms, because in there, he laid out a lot of sexual definitions of terms to explain it to the reader. And they went like nuts. You can't use that word. You can't this. And he's like, but these are clinicians.
Yes.
Took him 6 months. Took me 2 weeks.
It's interesting. I reviewed a protocol once for an IRB, not here at the Chicago school, and the person wanted to, they were outside of the US, which is where they're going to do their research in Uganda. And they wanted to interview women who were a part of the sex trade, and it blew the IRB up. It was really, really dangerous because they were thinking, so what happens if this woman talking to you triggers something? What if this person is harmed? There were a whole lot of what ifs that came with simply asking questions of this particular person. And it took a lot of effort to be able to collaborate, find a partner in Uganda who could also help with this research. It was a huge, huge deal. Ultimately got through, but it took multiple rounds of review. So when you're picking a topic for a dissertation, what I, and Dr. Dixon, this might be the same for you, instruct people to do is try to do the thing that you can research and actually get out of school. You don't really want the research that's going to take you 10 years. Do that once you graduate.
Yep, that's what I just told a student the other day is let's look at it this way. This is your pilot project to get to that bigger goal. Exactly. You're going to do some work here first. So do your dissertation on this lesser part of it to get you out of school, but builds on that larger thing you want to do. Because I had a student who wanted to do some work with interviews and stuff with kids. And I'm like, you can, but here's the deal. And if you're okay with that, then I'm okay. It's my job to give you fair warning. And then I do want to say, Dr. Tara W., that Jane made a good comment question on here. She said, she's not that she wants to do this, but you have to fill in holes in research. You can't prove an older project true. For example, diffusion of responsibility research. You can.
Yeah, you can.
Can be difficult.
Usually, often that's a thesis.
Yeah.
Yep, it's usually a thesis, but it can be done. You just have to very clearly present why doing that topic is actually filling a gap in the research, because it still is. Yes. Potentially.
And like mine, for example, Jane, on my thesis that we talked about earlier, my thesis was one of those. I was building on something that was sort of known, but back in the late 90s and early 2000s, it was on fatherhood. There was a lot of research on fatherhood, but there was one person that had wrote a very influential book that me, several faculty I worked with, and lots of people did not agree with his approach and his view of fatherhood and masculinity in men. And so part of my dissertation was not necessarily filling a hole, but a counter response using a different lens and a different approach to answering his question and coming up with almost the same finding with some tweaks because you looked at it a different way. So it would be a replicate. I was just thinking, if you're talking about like replication, a straight replication study can be a little difficult sometimes, not necessarily writing and doing it, but the attack you're going to take from the person who that is the problem, and it can hurt you in your field. I wouldn't necessarily want a student to do that unless their tweak is positive. Wouldn't you say?
I agree. So let's look at these two really quick. I completely agree. Then after that, they're the last two chapters, 4 and 5. So those first 3 chapters are somebody else's stuff, essentially. You're introducing a study, the review of the literature, research design. These are things that you didn't create. But chapters 4 and 5, you are the expert, because these are your results, your findings, things that you identified, discovered, so to speak, based on your research. And then you will present those results and findings in chapter 4. Chapter 5 is the discussion, the conclusions.
Yeah, chapter 4 is easy. It is basically, if you're doing interviews or doing data, it's what did the data, what did the interviews, what did the subjects say in relation to my research questions? What themes or data information did I find out, and writing it out. So at this point, this is really, I found this section to be really easy to write, really enjoyable to write, because you're analyzing your data at that time and you're excited about it. If you're at that point and you're not excited about it, this is going to be miserable. But if you're excited enough about it, because it's just enough to get you out of school and you actually care about the stuff, this thing, you could, I mean, I bet you mine, I'm almost sure that my dissertation chapter 4 was probably long. It was like 45 pages maybe. But I interviewed a lot of people and found out a lot of information. So it's like, and then chapter 5 is not bad. Chapter 5 is linking what you found out up in chapter 2 is from the literature. You're discussing their findings. So it's a link between chapter 2 and 4.
And so now what?
4, you're making no assumptions. 4, you're literally laying down what they said or what the data said. If you do a quantitative paper, this could be very short. It could be 8 pages, maybe 10. Easy. 5 is qualitative. What were the limitations? And limitations also include, what would I have done differently? What would I have done better? Same thing if that's statistical. If you're doing a quantitative, it's going to talk about the mathematical or the data limitations on the data points that you collected, and your conclusions. And then limitations would be your own. So if you're writing a qualitative one, my programs in both cases, you have to write a section, at least a few paragraphs on how it impacted you as the person and how you impacted the research. So for example, I'm at that time, a 40-year-old, late 30s, 40-year-old man interviewing college age students that were essentially my eldest daughter's age. So I have to make that understanding of saying, me as a researcher, I need to understand that I possibly impacted an interview with those students for several reasons, and I would list reasons.
For a qualitative study, you necessarily impact them. So yeah,
Yes,
absolutely
no
right.
question.
How are you a part of the research? How do you influence how the
And then-
results were delivered?
And then quantitatively, it's the same thing. Like, what could I have done different, better? How should I have looked at the data? How should I have asked a better question? Was my interview was my survey written well? Did I invite the right people to my mixed methods survey and focus group? All those things. So this one's a little more tedious. And then in our programs, it'll be how does it relate to how's it relate to the counseling profession, counselor education profession? How's it relate to PsyD profession? How's it relate to whatever you're doing? And if it's in our programs, often it's like, how does this relate to their code of ethics, to our KCREP, those things.
Yep.
Did I miss anything, Dr. Taylor?
Nope, I think you are good. So this is actually my dissertation,
There it is.
courtesy of
That's what they
Pamela
look
Wilson,
like.
thank goodness. Yeah, so it is just a bound book. Looks
Yep,
like
that's it. That's what mine looks like.
on a kitchen counter.
okay.
So I appreciate you. Thank you for sending those to me. So we've been talking a little bit about faculty experiences. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how we got through our own dissertation processes. So how we chose our topics, what worked, what didn't work, how we chose our chairs, how we chose our committee members, the proposal and defense experiences, what the IRB was like, although I've already talked about that. Data collection, what was writing, what was that like? The final product, and any types of presentations we've done afterwards. So quickly, I can say I chose my topic based on what I've already discussed. There was no literature really about eating disorders in Black women, and I was very personally affected by eating disorders among a couple of Black women who could get away with all kinds of disordered eating behavior, and nobody, even in like schools or hospitals, thought anything of it. To that point, there was a research article written in the 90s by someone named, I think it might have been Gold, but they looked at three different, I'll think about the author later, three different groups of, let me start over. In a survey class, an undergraduate psych class, there, let's say were 99 people, 33, 33, and 33. They divided the room up and they gave each of these three groups a scenario about a person with an eating disorder. They only changed one variable. So group A got the white girl, group B got the Latina girl, group C got the Black girl. Everything else was controlled. It was the same. So they asked people at the end, what is a diagnosis this person has? The white girl had anorexia nervosa. The Latina girl, I think, had some poverty issue, and the Black girl had a drug issue. Nothing was different about the scenario. So we were looking at how people have perceptions of what can happen with a person, what diagnostic categories into which they fit, based on the perception of race. So for me, those types of studies were a really big deal because that meant that people who have particular conditions are either over or underdiagnosed. So for instance, there can be a white woman who's thin because she's just thin. She might not have anorexia nervosa. She might just be thin, but the clinical perception of this person might be that she's got disordered eating because of the size of her body. Where this Latina girl and this Black girl might have they have the most raging eating disorders on the planet, and they might be missed. In fact, research that support that Black women have much more severe eating disorders by the time they present for treatment because they are overlooked often. So that was a really big influence between personal experiences and what I read on how I chose my topic. And then what worked and what didn't work. I had three different chairs. My first chair, she just didn't seem to have a lot of time for what I was doing. My second chair, and I think we just kind of fell out. We just didn't agree on a couple of things. But my third chair, I think, may have shown up in a cave. She was the most amazing chair ever. She's actually the the program director at another university now, but she really said, let's make an outline. Let's figure out how this works. How much time do you want to spend doing this? If you want to get out of here, I'll get you out. And she was wonderful the entire time, very real. She did make me cry once, which makes me laugh to this day. And I think it might make her laugh a little bit too, because right before I went to defend my final dissertation, she made me read it to her, which is something I make all of my students do too. She made me read all 187 pages, which is what it ended up being with appendices, like it was a storybook. And the thing that actually made me cry and was that she sat there and watched me read it, which was a little awkward, but she was holding a stuffed animal, and just everything about the scene just felt weird to me. So she told me, you can cry if you want to, but you're still going to read it. So she made me sit there and read it. And the beauty in reading it is that you catch things when you read aloud that you might not catch when you're just reading to yourself. So if you've written the word the twice, your brain will actually kind of cover up that second the. But when you read it aloud, you'll stumble because there's a word there that shouldn't be there. So pretty much everything Dr. Shannon Dermer did was, I think, awesome. I chose her because I was having some trouble with the chair before her, and a friend of mine who also graduated from the same university as me talked about how awesome Shannon Dermer had been as her chair. And I'd also sat on Dr. Dermer's committee, her hiring committee. So I figured, let's give this person a chance. Best decision I ever made in that program. The committee members it was a committee member group of convenience. I picked the people who actually knew something about eating disorders. One I picked was because she was just there. And the other ones were the people who actually had some understanding of the process. So it made it a little bit easier to pick them. Proposal and defense were actually straightforward. My defense was a little bit bumpy because there was one person who I guess decided on the day of my defense, she was going to make me work for it, I guess. And thank goodness one of my friends who graduated about a month before me, or defended about a month before me, came to my defense presentation and was able to say some things that I couldn't have said, because this one professor walked in with her little qualitative research book, and I guess she was going to, I don't know what her issue was. Maybe she was sleepy that day, but she was going to use me, make an example of me. And the friend of mine who was there was very, very helpful in being able to question some of the stuff this person was doing. But otherwise, the proposal and defense were good. IRB was a little drawn out because my topic triggered them, but ultimately that was okay. Data collection was fun. I enjoyed talking to my participants and interviewing and theming what they said and figuring out what it meant and how it all fit together. Writing was interesting. I had to write my dissertation multiple times because but the chair that I ended up not having, that my final chair, just didn't like something about my writing. So we even at one point had somebody else who was an editor actually edit the entire dissertation and send that to him. He didn't like that either. But my last chair actually sat there and said, no, this is pretty good. I need you to tweak this, this, and this. Read it to me. We'll edit it while you read. Knock it out. Final product was what you just saw slide back. And then afterwards, I was able to get an article and probably 6 or 7 presentations out of it. So it worked out for me. Dr. Dixon, what was your experience like?
Ooh, all of those things, huh? Okay, choose my topic. So what we talked about earlier, one of the things you guys will enjoy about our program, and one way in which I got to my topic, was when you get into that internship 3 and you have to start collecting research hours, what my program did is you had to collect 50 research hours working with someone in a research project. So I knew I wanted to work on from a theoretical perspective on what's called emerging adults. So that's basically 18 to 26-year-old people. And so I knew that's the group I wanted to work with. And I luckily just happened to find a group that was working with some all-girls schools, and an all-girls school, my dog's down there barking at himself, all-girls schools network across the state of Texas, actually across the US. And so when I started working with them, I was going to do one little project with them, and we did it, we finished it. And I was going to use some of that archival data and just do my dissertation. Woohoo, easy enough. But I changed my mind and decided to go with interviewing, because I realized while doing that project, there was a little hole there. And that was basically, I got very lucky in a few things. I interviewed young ladies who had gone to at least one of the 6 all-girls schools in the state of Texas that were in the same network. And they all went to the same large university here in Texas. Come to find out, I would reach out to those schools and I'd say, I don't need to know the names. I just need to know how many students in the last 2 or 3 years have you sent to this university? Every one of the schools told me there were exactly 60 students. So if you write your title and if you write your research question well, my population for my study, the entire population was 60. So I interviewed, remember I threw one out. I fully interviewed 6 people, threw one out. So I was at 7, but I interviewed 6. That's 10% of the population based on how I wrote my study. Tricky, right? Because people are going, how are you going to get away with writing a dissertation with 6 people? I explained in my defense that right there. And they're like, okay. Plus my interview was kind of lengthy and pretty in depth. So I was able to ask a lot of deep questions and found out a lot of good information. So that's kind of how I chose my topic. So it's kind of convenience and kind of interest. And I ended up being very interested in it and developed a lot of relationships across the state and other places. One place my dissertation was published is there's several around the world and around the US. There's several girls' school or single-sex school associations. What was it? The Australia, because I talked to them when the network in Australia and the network in the US took it and wanted and used it for something. And so I was happy about that. That's called a secondary publication, really. And then, so that worked pretty well. I wouldn't say nothing, it didn't not work. Making a little changes on my interview protocol. Oh, this was funny. Our program at one point had put out too many grounded studies. So, and this didn't bother me, I didn't care, but so they were like, you know what? We don't want any more grounded theory dissertations for some period of time. This is just ridiculous. So I'm like, okay, fine. So I go out there and I'm being kind of an arrogant ass. And I'm like, we're going to choose hermeneutic phenomenology. And they're like, what? Hi, Nigel. Yeah, I'm going to choose hermeneutic phenomenology. And they're like, okay. So it's really a mix of 2 different types of phenomenologies that I end up using. Not based on my chair, but just based on my own stubbornness. So that actually worked. I probably would have done a grounded because I did a grounded for my thesis, but I changed it because whatever. I wanted to get out of school. Next one, how I chose my chair. So I'm glad we don't have this problem here, but in my university, there were 6 full-time CES faculty. You had to choose 3, well, and plus a couple of methodologists are outside. You had to choose 3 people. Yes. In a minute. We had to choose people from that group of people. Tricky because when you walk into your chair, who I think very highly of, when you walk into your chair's office, he goes, okay, here's the deal. And I knew him well. He said, here's the deal. I will work with A, B, and C. I will not work with D and E, and don't even try to get me to work with F. That was exactly how it went. And I'm like, well, good, because I wanted to work with this one, this one, and this one. Well, I get my committee all set up. I got the chair I wanted. I got the methodologist. His name was Dr. Doomer. He came from Ed Psych in the same college as us. So he's like the best in the world. I adore this guy. And then I got the reader that I wanted that I just loved. One little hitch there was my reader was the department chair at one point. She was on the outs with those 3 other people that were difficult. She left in the middle of the process. So I had to take one of the difficult people. Not fun. We'll get to that later because one of them gave me crap. So choosing your committee and choosing your chair, make sure they work well together. I am not aware of anyone in this faculty, CMHC or CES, that do not get along. I'm already on some combination of different committees here, and I love all of them just make sure you're choosing that chair and that committee, make sure they have some interest in what you're doing. Make sure that they're at a good point in their life to be able to do that. I don't think that my professor that I chose thought she was leaving, but she did. And that put a little kink in it when I had to add the other person. As far as like proposal and experience defense, my proposal without a hitch, really, because that favorite professor was still there. So that wasn't a big deal. Now, defense is a different story. Defense was, I had to fight with the school, and I will be honest with you guys how it goes here. You come in on a handbook, you come in on a student handbook, and you come in on a dissertation handbook. When you come in, that is what you and the school have agreed to. In my handbook, it said, and I quote because I did, that they do not do dissertation defenses in the summer because the faculties aren't expected to be there. But it did not say we don't do proposals. It just said defenses. But they had since written, by the time I'm getting ready to graduate, they had since written a new one that said they didn't do either one and blah, blah, blah. So I already have a job. I'm already headed to Nebraska for my first academic position. And the reader, the stubborn one, the one that replaced my two favorites, because I loved my committee, said, no, our handbook says you can't defend in the summer. Sorry, you got a job. That's your problem. Call and let them know. And I'm like, no, 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 no. No, no. By the way, this man had been teaching 43 years and had said, I'm going to retire for the last 15 of those. And we got along good. He just said, no, I'm not going to be here this summer. I said, but that's not what it says. So I pulled out my handbook out of my notebook that we tell people back then, keep that thing handy. I pulled it out and said, no, it says you don't do defenses. As we're having that conversation, stubborn person number 2 walks by and goes, hey, what's going on? And I said, this. And she's like, well, but, and then kind of sided with him for a minute. I said, but no, wait a minute. This is our contract. And it does say, and by the way, respectful as hell. Like they weren't mad at me. I wasn't mad at them. They were just kind of like, no, no, no. Once I explained my point, it was not 30 minutes later, they go into a faculty meeting. The one guy who was being difficult convinced the others, and my chair convinced the others, though too, the one being difficult convinced the others to allow me to do my defense because I was right. And I stood up for myself and said, you know, this is what it said, and you come in on the right handbook. So if you have to hold faculty's feet to something because it says it, not that they said it or something else, but a formal document, one of your forms, your manual, whatever, hold us to it, hold them to it. But pick that committee that is going to be, you know, helpful. So then I'm going to defend. Again, it's the summer. So I actually find somebody, and at my university, you had to have a 4th person in the room, which was a grad school representative. The grad school representative was a person who helped you with your committee and represented the grad school. However, he was a hard scientist from biology. So as I'm going through this qualitative research study and using qualitative terms from hermeneutic phenomenology, he's like, no, 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 wait a minute. Hey, wait a minute. What does this mean? What does this mean? And I'll try to explain it like perfectly word for word. My methodologist literally stood up and said, he has said every one of the things perfectly. I'm telling you, he's right. Leave it alone. Okay. Because he just could not understand the terms. So that got through it. IRB was a breeze, no problem. Data collection was a ton of fun doing those interviews. The girls were very open. I loved it. Writing was interesting. Again, remember I had a job. I wrote chapters 1, 2, and 3, were one thing that we didn't talk about. I started writing those probably the first or second term I was in school. So when I'm in my first class, I started writing about it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had some idea I wanted to work with this particular theory. So in theory class, I wrote about it. And I knew I wanted to add some wellness. So I threw some Sweeney and Myers wellness in there. So by the time I got to my research and fieldwork experience, I had some idea. And then I'm like, captive audience, young girls, program, students, college students, passable, easy. So got all that written up, got past my IRB, did the interviews, loved those. And then I happened to work for the greatest boss ever. I had saved up a ton of hours at work. I basically took 2 weeks off of work, yet went to work every morning at 8 a.m. and did not leave till 5, locked myself in the office. They wouldn't let me out without permission to go pee. I swear this is not a joke. Would not let me out to go pee. They wouldn't let me out. Like they would bring my lunch to me. They took care of me. And I sat in my office for over all week long, 40 hours a week, plus weekends, and wrote in 2 weeks. Yeah, so got it done. Final product worked out well. Defense was fine. And then I think one of the things we don't talk about, and we probably could do an entire session on, Dr. TRW, is that post-dissertation blues, that post-defense blues.
Yeah.
That's a whole thing, so.
2 things that you reminded me of too. I met a woman when I was in my internship. I don't know I don't know why we were there. Maybe I'll have to talk about it when I get home. I met some random woman who had finished her dissertation. She did the whole thing in 5 weeks. And not 5 consecutive weeks, but 3 weeks, couple weeks for the proposal defense, and then the last piece, because that woman found out that she had 1 semester left, or she would start to lose credits. So what she and her chair devised was they had an existing data set. She was going to write those first 3 chapters out, get it proposed, that worked, and then she already had an existing data set. So you can actually use existing data. I think it was a data set from the CDC. And then she wrote that up because she really had a very limited amount of time, or she would start losing credits, because generally schools have a limit on how long you can be in the program without extensions. And this research is only supposed to be good for about 10 years. And then you start to lose 50% of its value.
90% of the places, I believe it's 7 years, correct?
Yes.
I've heard of 10 before. I would never do that. A 7. We did have a committee member at my school that basically that clock starts. She started the 7-year clock on you as soon as you finish your qualitative exams and became a doctoral candidate.
Yeah.
And she would use every minute of 7 years if you let her.
And,
And that's
and this,
horrible.
and so when I tell students that a dissertation is 5 20-page papers, which is what I tell them often, it came from meeting that woman who said she had to look at it that way because she could write a 20-page paper and crank it out in a week. And she had to look at it because all this work that she'd done was going to essentially be canceled out if she didn't get this done in this amount of time. So she had a creative enough chair. She had a supportive husband and 3 kids who the husband was willing to, keep away from mommy for these weekends. And for 5 weekends, 3 together, then there was a little bit of space, then 2 together. She had to crank this paper out. It was not ideal. She said it was stressful, but she needed to get it done. So the 5 20-page paper thing, it wasn't exactly 20 pages for each chapter, but in general, it was about 20 pages. I said my dissertation was 187 pages. I guess it wasn't. It was 183 pages. All right, so
Go ahead.
most important, make sure you access your resources. Your chair is a huge resource if you have a good chair. In our department, I think any chair you pick would actually be a pretty attentive chair. Have good committees and your own colleagues. What I also recommend people do is get 1 or 2 dissertations. One dissertation that is the closest dissertation you can find to your topic in the world. The one that I chose was one that was entitled Raisins and Smiles for Me and My Sister, written by a woman named Becky Thompson from Brandeis University, who I've since met in Massachusetts. And I thought I could get it from interlibrary loan from my school. They wouldn't do it. My family drove up to Boston. I couldn't get it there, but eventually, I don't remember how I got it. I still have it. Ended up with that dissertation. It was looking at eating disorders in non-traditional populations. So Black women, Jewish women, lesbian women, Orthodox women, all these different women who people often overlook in the research. It was an awesome, awesome, awesome dissertation. It influenced mine where I felt like I needed to give it a cool title, not just dissertation. And Becky,
Okay, so I was going to add something to that when you finish.
and Becky Thompson was awesome. So I appreciated that. I needed her dissertation and then one from the University of Akron so I could see what a dissertation looked like once it was approved. So if you can find one dissertation at the Chicago school that both covers your topic and is, written from approved at the university, that's great. You may need 2. You might be able to do it in 1. What were you going to say, Cody?
I was going to add to that 2 things. 1, colleagues. So me and my cohort, 3 of us who were graduating roughly the same time, we worked on our dissertations together as independent readers. So my dissertation was read no less than 42 times that I'm aware of, seriously, because we work on our dissertations together in a Google Doc. I would work on 1 or 2 of theirs. They would work on mine. We would look at them as a non-expert, as a non-academic, and then how academics would look at it. And so having a colleague to write with is super helpful. Because they catch those things we were talking about earlier that maybe sentences to us make sense, but to a lay person or even another academic might be completely confusing. Number 2, you will find people, as you can tell from us, people love to talk about these topics in themselves. My person, Dr. Rush Wilson, was a guy named Joel Lane. He's a professor at Portland State University. I could not get a copy. I saw some of his papers, couldn't get his dissertation. I sent Dr. Lane an email when I was a doc student. We had multiple telephone conversations after that. And then he sent me, and during that period of time, he sent me a copy of his dissertation and 2 or 3 of his other articles that he had published instead of me having to look for them, and 2 that he had not yet finished. And and was very helpful. I reached out to, when I was working with the National Association of Girls Schools, including the Texas Association, I got to talk to the CEO who gave me pointers and suggestions. Got to talk to the director at the national one, and got to talk to the director at the one in Australia, because they do a lot of work. So never be afraid to reach out to that big name or
Absolutely.
that person, because they will help you 90% of the time.
They
I had
sure will.
one person ever, it was on it was on my thesis before, that wouldn't help, but he's also kind of known as an ass. The fact that he actually just responded and gave me a two paragraph little response on what he thinks was all I ever could get from him, but at least he responded.
You got that. Yeah.
Yeah, you get that. So do that, like reach out to those people. Ask for all of our dissertations, go to various libraries, look for dissertations, read them, look through them.
Look them up online too. I mean, you have access to dissertation databases. Look them up online. And the other thing I'll say with respect to resources, I think that was the last one, make sure that you allow yourself to be human. Because when I was writing my dissertation, I was a married mom of it's 2000, I think she was one. I started writing when I was pregnant. I had a 1-year-old, 2-year-old when I was done. It took a while for me to write it because I had life to live. So it could have been done more quickly. There was one guy in our program who, as soon as he finished his internship, he defended his dissertation because he was writing it the entire time. Very smart person. But depend on your family, get resources, allow yourself to talk about it. Talk to your friends who are going through the same thing if you know other people, and you should, because you're in a program. I remember
time off work. I knew that I was, this job you're doing now is, well, maybe for some of you, hopefully for some of you, it's a means to an end. And that may not be the job you're going to do when you leave. I knew I was going to do an academic job. My people that work with me knew I wasn't going to be there forever. Start banking up sick leave or hours or whatever you can, so that when you get to the end, you can really focus on getting the dissertation. I was fortunate, but I was like in Dr. Rush Wilson's same spot. I had a job. We're getting ready to move to Nebraska. I defend my dissertation on a Tuesday. We're in court on Friday adopting little Nigel you see running around. Itty bitty tiny baby, and moved to Nebraska. That was at 8 a.m. and moved to Nebraska that evening. And by the way, I already had a wife and 2 kids.
Yeah, I didn't even cancel like my client for that afternoon, which I think is kind of goofy now. So I went and defended my dissertation with, I guess, a lot of optimism, and came back and saw that client, but had to really rely on, and Lo Wilson, you're here in the room, rely on him to listen to me. I don't even know what kind of mental state I was in by the end. I needed support. The way that I knew I needed support, and it still makes me laugh to this day, is I remember listening to one of my daughter's Elmo albums, and for whatever reason, Elmo just moved me, and I'm sitting in the parking lot of Toys R Us crying because I was just overwhelmed with my life, going, this is silly. It's 520-page papers. Let me have some perspective so that I don't end up, someplace I don't want to be, sitting in the parking lot crying, listening to Elmo, trying to write a dissertation. So I had to kind of create some order in my life and figure out how I can appropriately and reasonably write this paper. It's just a paper. At the end of the day, it's just a paper. How can I write this thing, get it defended, and get out of there?
And that's what our goal is, to help you do that.
Yeah.
We do. I mean, like I said, if we give you a easy way out, like, hey, do this, it'll be the easy way to do it. You can take it, or you can take the medium road one that might just be as easy, or you might be brave and try to take the hard one.
It was interesting because one of my colleagues at a different university wrote a dissertation that we did read in our house to kind of help her out, and it was super long. It was very confusing. It was very dry. So that was some of the feedback we had to find a way to give her. You want to make it so that it is readable and it doesn't kind of keep your you never look at Elmo the same. Elmo is there's more depth to Elmo than maybe people realized, but we had to give her that feedback so that she didn't get it from the committee and hold her back. So make sure you access your resources, talk to people, make sure things make sense, and understand it's just a paper.
Use your classmates for support, emotionally. Use your classmates for support. Use your classmates for support academically. Have them read for each other. Do all you can. Yes, Elmo does have some depth. So yours was Elmo. For me, I did the same thing. I did my dissertation defense. I shook the hands, hugged the guys, walked out of the room, started cussing about how none of them, they had just read sentence 3 on chapter 4. They had known the answer to that blank, blank, blank question, got in my truck, listened to some hardcore punk music, went to work and finished out my job and moved.
There's a recovery process after that kind of pressure for that amount of time.
Okay
Allow
for
that.
you guys to be angry. It's okay for you to be angry at us,
Mhm.
at each other, like frustrated, sad, cuddle Elmo, hard rock music. I don't care what it takes, but
nobody says, "Oh, I wish I could just give it back." After you're done, you're glad you've done it.
Oh,
You're
yeah.
glad it's over.
I mean, just because I don't have a copy of mine doesn't mean I'm not
You
defensive.
can still get one.
You can still get one.
It's still, yeah. I just got mine not long ago.
Yeah, see.
All right, so in these last couple minute or so, anybody have any questions?
Hey, G.
Hey, Gigi. No questions? It's funny, one of the things I did do is in the title page of my dissertation, I gave a lot of shout outs. And I'd laugh when I think about the friends I thanked, family members by name. I don't know if I thanked Elmo or not. I may have, I'm not sure, but I probably should have, because those things are really meaningful in that experience, even though they might sound a little bit silly. That's the stuff that got me through.
I think I thanked all 19 of my cohort members. Even
And
like 3 of us worked on it together.
All right.
We're
No
here for all your
questions?
questions. And if you needed, if you wanted to look at some of the stuff we were talking about, you can go to the website, or you can go to the CES advising forum. If you work through the first couple of modules and look through that stuff, when you get down towards the bottom, you'll see the stuff about the dissertation. You can always go there and read it, and it should be a pretty helpful guide. If not, reach out to any of us.
Any of us, yeah. All right, it was good to see you, or at least see your names on the screen for those who weren't able to use your cameras. Thank you so much. And Enla Wilson, thank you for sending me pictures of my dissertation. And feel better for those of you who are under the weather. Everybody else have a good day.
Thank you, Dr. TRW. Thank you, Dr.
Thank you,
Dixon.
Gigi.
I'll be emailing you soon. I have a couple of questions since you're my chair, but
Okay.
I'll wait till later in the week. I'm out.
Sounds good. I'll be here.
Okay. All right.
Or in Canada, depends if I make it back.
Right.
In the
Talk to
region.
you soon.
We'll see. Yes,
Bye,
sir.
Gigi. Bye, Stuart.
See you later, Dr. Dixon.
Oh, bye, Jane. I'm assuming that's my Andrea there. I don't know which one that is.